The year of 1822 found the United States still young, still stretching, and still struggling with the contradictions that had been present since its founding. Only 46 years after declaring independence, America was defining its role on the world stage, managing expansion at home and wrestling with the persistent issue of slavery. 1822 was a year of important developments. The admission of new states and cities into prominence, the strengthening of the U.S. foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere, and the growing voice of reformers and abolitionists. It was also the year of a failed slave revolt in Charleston, the birth of future leaders and cultural icons, and the expansion of economic opportunity through new routes and commerce. In this episode of Larry Reed's America, we'll journey through 1822, a year of ambition, anxiety, and the relentless spirit of growth that has always defined the American experiment. President James Monroe entered 1822 still at the helm of the so-called era of good feelings. The Federalist Party had all but collapsed, leaving the Democratic Republicans dominant. But one-party rule did not mean unity. Beneath the calm surface, sectional rivalries over slavery, tariffs, and Western lands boiled. Monroe's leadership style was calm and unifying. He rarely sought confrontation, preferring steady management. In 1822, he was already laying the groundwork for what would become the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, watching European politics closely as Spain's empire continued to collapse. The United States was secure and growing, but cracks were beginning to show. By 1822, the Union contained 24 states. Missouri had been admitted the year before, and the balance between free and slave states was maintained for the moment. But in the territories and new settlements, the question of slavery expansion remained ever present. Meanwhile, new American cities were rising. In 1822, Florida organized its first counties, reflecting its integration into the Union. Communities like Key West began to emerge as trading hubs, shaping the commercial geography of the Southwest. The growth of states and cities was physical proof that American experiments was working, but it also made the debates sharper. Who would live in these new places and under what laws?
Mexico.
1822 was a crucial year for Latin American independence. By this time, most Spain colonies in the Americas had declared independence. In 1822, the United States officially recognized Argentina, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico as independent nations. This was a bold step. It signaled to Europe that America was aligning itself with the revolutionary movements sweeping the hemisphere. It also marked the beginning of America's role as a defender of independence in the New World, a stance that would crystallize in the Monroe Doctrine. For Monroe and Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, the recognition was both strategic and moral. Strategic because it encouraged trade with new republics. Moral because it affirmed American sympathy with nations throwing off colonial rule, even as the U.S. failed to resolve its own contradiction of slavery. Perhaps the most dramatic event on American soil in 1822 was the Denmark-Vesey conspiracy in Charleston, South Carolina. Vesey, a free black man who once had been enslaved, organized what he envisioned as a massive slave uprising. The plan called for thousands of enslaved people to seize weapons, storm Charleston, and escape to Haiti, where slavery had been overthrown. But the conspiracy was betrayed. Before it could launch, Vesey and dozens of followers were arrested. After a secret trial, Vesey and 34 others were executed, and many more were deported or punished. The event terrified slaveholders across the South. It revealed the ever-present fear that enslaved people would rise against their masters. For abolitionists, Vesey became a martyr, a man who sought freedom in a land that proclaimed liberty. The American economy in 1822 was recovering from the panic of 1819. Prices were stabilizing, but debt and distrust lingered. Farmers in the West and South pushed further into new lands, while merchants in the East looked abroad to Latin America's new markets. Shipping routes expanded, particularly in the Gulf and Caribbean trade. Florida's new ports began to play a role in commerce, while New York City was rising as the nation's financial hub. The Erie Canal, still under construction, promised to transform trade when completed. Despite hardships, Americans carried a sense of optimism, the belief that growth was always just around the corner. Expansion in 1822 meant further pressure on Native Americans. Settlers poured into Florida and the Old Northwest, sparking disputes and resistance. The Seminoles in Florida, already threatened by American encroachment, faced increasing conflict. Federal Indian policy at the time sought to remove tribes from valuable lands. Though the Trail of Tears was still more than a decade away, its foundation was laid in these years. The United States viewed expansion as destiny. Native peoples experienced it as a loss. Both stories were unfolding in 1822. The Second Great Awakening continued to surge in 1822. Evangelical revival spread through frontier regions, preaching salvation and moral discipline. Camp meetings drew thousands, offering both spiritual renewal and social community. The religious energy spilled into reform. Preachers spoke against alcohol abuse, gambling, and immorality. Abolitionist voices grew louder, inspired by Christian belief in human equality. For many ordinary Americans, religion gave meaning to hardship and hope for change. 1822 revivals remind us how deeply faith shaped the nation's social and political life. 1822 saw the continued growth of American institutions. Newspapers flourished, offering political commentary and connecting distant communities. Colleges multiplied, training a new generation of leaders. Scientific exploration expanded too. Naturalists studied America's vast landscapes, cataloging plants, animals, and geography. The frontier was not only a place for settlers, it was a laboratory for understanding the natural world. Culturally, the U.S. was beginning to develop its own voice. Distinct from Europe, American writers and artists were finding themselves in the frontier, in liberty, and in contradictions of their society. 1822 brought the birth of figures who would leave lasting marks. Rutherford B. Hayes, October 4th, 1822, future 19th President of the United States, remembered for ending Reconstruction. Ulysses S. Grant, April 27th, 1822, future Civil War general and 18th President who would preserve the Union and fight for Reconstruction. Harriet Tubman is often dated around 1822 as her birth. She would become one of the greatest abolitionists and leaders of the Underground Railroad. These births alone make 1822 remarkable. The leaders of the mid-19th century were coming into the world preparing to face nation's greatest trials. Deaths included in 1822 General William Pinckney, a statesman, a diplomat whose careers reflected the early republic's foreign policy challenge. Looking back, 1822 was a year of contrast. The recognition of Latin America's independence suggested Americans' growing confidence abroad. But at home, the Vesey Revolt showed the deep injustice and fear produced by slavery. The economy pushed forward though slowly, and religious revivals inspired reformers who would shape future decades. It was a year when future presidents and heroes were born, reminding us that history often planted seeds quietly. 1822 was not as dramatic as a year of war or revolution, but it set the stage for struggles and triumphs that lay ahead. We had some flaws. Slavery's brutality was laid bare by the Vesey conspiracy and its bloody aftermath. Expansion came at the expense of native peoples, displacing communities from ancestral lands. Economic recovery was uneven, with many farmers still in debt. But 1822 was a year of forward motion, recognition of new republics, integration of Florida, and the birth of leaders who would guide the nation. But the flaws, slavery, inequality, and native displacement prevent a higher grade. I don't know. It was mixed, but I mean we're moving forward. I'd give it a B. I'd give the grade a B for that year. So 1822 was a year of promise and of warning. America extended its hand to new republics abroad and pressed westward at home. The seeds of reform were planted, and the future presidents and heroes were born, yet slavery, economic insecurity, and injustice remained unresolved. As we continue our countdown to 250, 1822 reminds us that history moves forward in steps, both large and small. Some years roar with revolutions, others whisper with beginnings. But each one adds to the fabric of the American story, a story of struggle, growth, and enduring hope. I want to thank everybody for listening. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. And I will talk to you on the next podcast.